Hi guys, it's Gilly Hunt here with the letter I for inks, probably one of the most important sessions on my A to Z guide for Stampin' Up products. So what are we going to cover with inks? Wow, it's such a big project. Let's just start by saying Stampin' Up, who as you know I work for, and you can always go to gillyhunt.com to do your shopping with Stampin' Up. I would be very grateful for. But Stampin' Up produce a good number of inks, including their own brand, and I just thought I'd bring you here just a really tiny selection of our lovely blues and green inks. All our inks are contained in a lovely little pad, which I'll show you and introduce you to in a moment. And the inks inside are dye-based inks. And also later on in the video, I'll look at all the different types of inks and what you should perhaps generally use them for. Of course, I'm a girl that doesn't like too many rules. So although I'm going to give you some of the rules on which inks to use for which occasions, of course those rules are there to be broken. So I love to experiment with art things, and sometimes out of the most bizarre experiments come the best results. So don't be limited to what I'm saying. What I'm doing is just guiding you through, particularly if you're a beginner, and the whole idea of ink pads on shelves and in catalogues and in online just all looks so bemusing and so confusing. So let's get started with these lovely ink pads. First of all, to let you know, there are over 50 colours, and all of them, as I suggested when I did C in my A to Z for cardstock, all of them belong to colour families, and it's worth going back to that video which was C for cardstock, just to get an idea of the colour families. And these are available in matching colour families with the cardstock. So that's the first thing. Now, they come like this, and I'll show you. So they come in two formats, our inks. They come either as a stamping pad, which arrives like this, and I'm just going to show you. You cut it open, it's cello wrapped, so that during the travels, all the way from wherever it's coming from, nothing leaks, so they're all nicely wrapped. They come like this, and our most recent ones, these are fairly new, the latest version of our stamping pads. They already come with the front labelled with the colour. So you've got the front labelled, and then you just open them almost like you would just an ordinary mirror or compact, powder compact. So it's just a click opening, and you open it fully so that it's flat like that. And then once it's flat, you slide it in until it goes, listen, little click. And that way you know this is now totally solid. It's not going to fall off or jump around, and that's a really nice stable little stamping platform. Once you've finished using it, you put two fingers, or one finger if you're strong with two, I like two fingers, just on this little ridge piece here, and you just pull it back, and that little ridge piece stops you getting your fingers in the ink, and you pull it fully back, and then you lift it up and clip it down. So let me just do that one more time. Open, fully, click it until it goes click. Then you know it's nice and secure. Then you pull it out until it's fully extended, and then you just clip it down. At no point do you need to force it. So if it feels like you're forcing it, you've probably not extended it fully or opened it fully. Okay, so that's what it comes like. And then on the back, and I purposefully left this one on to show you. On the back is a sticky pad here. Oh, and this is great because it's come out with the English ones just there. There's a whole lot of little stickers, and each of these stickers are in a different language. So these are the European ones because these have come out to the European market, and I'm very lucky because just by chance, the two that stayed stuck down are the two English bits. So I want this one, which says No, you can't see. Hold on, let me find a place for white paper just to show you. Here we go. This one says Flirty Flamingo. Ooh, there we go. Flirty Flamingo. And what we do with this is we stick it. I wish I hadn't put it on the paper now. Right, we stick it down at this end so that I now know if I have these racked up in a big rack, which I do, I now know that this one is Flirty Flamingo. The only problem is when you open this and you're working, sometimes this could look like an orange or maybe a pink or maybe a brown even. So sometimes it's hard to tell what you've got. So here's the other thing they provide you with. One of the stickers is completely plain. It doesn't have any wording on. And you use this one to just stick in that little gap and groove, and that now means that when it's down on my table I can see what colour this ink is. So sometimes the inks look quite different on the pad than they do in real life, so that just allows you to have it on the front, on the side and on the inside. Isn't that clever? Now that's one way of getting your ink for using, and the other way is to buy some re-inkers. And this is simply the same ink in a bottle, and it is available just for you to use either as a completely separate ink for special effects, and we're going to have a look at those later on too, or to add in little droplets to your ink pad if your ink starts to dry up. Okay, now I'm going to tell you a little secret. Stampin' Up very kindly, if you look, oh, this is hard to show you, right, so here's the base, here's the top. As I open this up, you will notice that the ink pad is actually hanging from the lid. Does that make sense? It's not here where you'd expect it at the bottom, it's actually attached to the lid. So when this is closed and what looks like the right way up, the ink is gradually coming to the surface. Now that's great because it means that whilst you're storing it, the ink is gradually coming back up to the surface so that it stops it going dry. You've always got a nice fully loaded pad at the beginning. Now my little secret is that right at the very beginning your ink pad is full of ink. So you don't need more ink at the top because the whole of the sponge foam layer is nicely soaked. So I tend, for the certainly first few months, and sometimes even for as much as a year, after I've got them, I store mine upside down. Which means that in reality, although that feels like it's upside down now, the actual pad is now dripping the ink downwards towards the base of this foam pad. So it means that the top layer isn't totally soaked with ink. Okay, but at the point at which it starts to feel dry or it's not inking up your stamps properly, then you flip it over and carry on using it the way it's intended, which allows the ink to come to the surfaces. And it's only then that you need to start to top it up with a bit of the re-inker. So just a little tip. Okay, now the problem is I've talked about dye ink, and a lot of people find the whole idea of all the different types of inks really confusing, because not only do Stampin' Up sell their own ink, but they also sell some of the top quality other inks to augment our collection. We're never too mean-spirited to recognise that sometimes another company can produce something that's really worthwhile, and so when we do find something really worthwhile and it will augment and help our collection, we also sell it. So here is a quick guide for you that are beginners on stamping inks. So the first question is my ink water-based or is it non-water-based? Now this matters a great deal, and that matters a huge amount when you're stamping, because it allows you to colour with different products. If it's water-based, then it's possible that if you use anything that's wet or with any water in it to colour, it will pull the ink up and you will get a slightly blurred image, or it will muddy the edge of your colouring. If you've got something that's non-water based and you then use maybe something like an alcohol marker or a solvent marker, what will then happen is exactly the same. It will start to break down the chemicals. The chemicals will react together. So here's what's important. Depending on what you want to colour with, if you are going to colour in your images, you need to choose which of these types of inks you want to use. So if you want to use stamping blends, which are an alcohol-based marker, so that's a non-water-based item, then you need a water-based ink to use. Okay, if you want to use watercolour pencils, the many marvellous markers, or any dye-based inks using maybe your aqua brushes and things, then you need a non-water-based ink to start so that it won't pull that ink. Now, the easiest way to decide which is which is have a sniff, because most water-based products don't really smell much. So if you sniff our dye-based inks, there really isn't a great deal of smell to them. If you smell, let's say, something like a permanent marker, you know, those great big thick fat permanent markers that you use maybe on a whiteboard or something like that, they have quite a strong smell. And that strong alcohol-y, solvent-y chemical smell tells you that they're non-water based. So basically, these non-water based inks need non-smelly things. So watercolour pencils don't smell much, our marvellous markers don't smell much, our dye inks don't smell much. So they're great to be used with what are normally very smelly base inks. So smelly with non-smelly. Here we go. A water-based ink will be not smelly, but our stamping blends pens are alcoholic, and so they have quite a strong smell. In fact, they have a lovely smell of like almonds. It's a bit like Christmas cake. So that's a really easy way to remember. So let's go down to the actual inks themselves. So the water-based inks can be split into two camps. Those that are dye-based, which means that the actual colour is saturated throughout the water that holds them. So it's like totally dissolved. If you imagine when you boil sugar in water, the sugar becomes sugary water. It doesn't stay as little granules of sugar, it dissolves into the water and it becomes sugary water. So this is what happens to the pigments in a dye-based ink. It completely saturates and dissolves into and becomes one single liquid, not little granules in a liquid. And those dyes are made up of our Stampin' Up inks, so our normal inks. So these kind of inks are dye-based. Okay, let me then, I'm just going to cover myself up, there we go. And then the other type of ink that we sell, which is also dye-based, is the Memento inks. And these we choose to be really great blacks. So Stampin' Up inks and Memento are part of the dye-based selection. So they're very good as backgrounds for stamping blends. Okay, coming along, part of the same family because they are water-based, but this time we're going to look at a pigment ink. Now you may have other pigment inks. I certainly have. Before I joined Stampin' Up, I had lots of pigment inks. It was very much the popular ink going back some, I don't know, 20 or 30 years, was very much the popular ink. And these work by having the same water base like the dye ink, but instead of it dissolving, what happens is the little tiny particles of colour are just held in what's called suspension, so they're suspended in the liquid. So when you actually stamp using them, the water dissolves away and soaks into the paper as just a neutral, and what's left is the ink is left on the surface. So the actual colour is left on the surface, whereas these, dye-based, soak into your paper. Okay? Now, what's the difference in terms of using them? Well, not a great deal. You use them in the same way, but you need to be aware of a couple of things. Oh, sorry, I forgot to tell you. Our pigment ink that we sell is our craft white, which is pigment ink. So that instead of the white dissolving into the water and becoming a kind of very lukewarm, sort of mushy colour, what happens is that the white pigments stay on the surface, so it gives you, in fact I've got a piece here, it gives you a lovely chalky white kind of finish. If you look at it, it's almost got a slightly chalky feel to it, because what it has done is it's left the inks and the coloured pieces on top of the paper rather than soaking in. So that's our Whisper White. Now, those then are water-based inks, great for using with stamping blends, and actually probably the easiest to use, because if you're, other than the pigment, which takes a little while longer to dry because it has to carry that water, has to dry up out of it before it dries. So this one is slightly slower to dry, so sometimes you might try the ink and assume it's going to react the same way and then find that you smudge it. So be careful with your white. It's beautiful and it's lovely, but you need to let it dry before you start using it. And you can always heat seal it using a heat tool. Okay, so let's go back to these inks. These are probably the easiest to use and the ones that I use for my everyday stamping. Dye-based inks are brilliant for everyday stamping because they ink the paper well. The Stampin' Up paper, if you're using our papers, is designed specifically to take these dye-based inks, and they just go on beautifully. They stay on, the colour's great, the colour's totally colour fast and beautiful. And they dry very quickly, so almost instantly that you finish stamping and you move your stamp away, you can then carry on creating because there's not going to be any smudging or problems. Okay, now let's go to the other side. So these were our dye-based ones. Let's come across to the other side of the chart. So these are non-water-based inks. And non-water-based inks can be really divided into three camps. One is a solvent inks, one are alcohol inks, and the other are oil-based inks. Now, from our point of view at Stampin' Up, we really don't need alcohol or oil-based inks because we can get all the results we want using just the one solvent ink. So we've just chosen the very best in the market, which is the Stazon, and that looks like this. So here is the Stazon permanent wonderful inks. It's made using a solvent and you can really smell it. It's quite smelly. And you'll also notice something important, that when you open the lid you have a little piece of plastic that's not on any of the other inks at all. But the reason is, oh, and suddenly I've taken that off and oh, I can smell marzipan and Christmas cakes. So I take this off because this is stopping the alcohol, the solvent from, what's the word? From drying up, but that's not the word I was looking for. Anyway, you think of whatever word it is. Maybe put it in the comments below. Remind me. Evaporate, that's the word I was looking for. I found it. I knew it was in my brain somewhere. So it stops it evaporating, and so it's really important that when you buy this, you don't discard that. It says do not discard, but in very tiny little words. Do not discard. The reason is you need to put that back on every time you use it. And I have to say, if I'm not using my solvent inks very often, I put a little piece of, in fact, look, I'll show you. I've put on these, I keep a little piece of tear tape that I just keep it shut, and it just seals it and makes sure it's totally sealed shut. So a little piece of tear tape either side doesn't do any harm, just to keep it totally sealed. Now I'm going to cover a lot of information on Stazon in the O for on anything in my A to Z, so I'm hardly going to talk about Stazon today, okay? But just be aware that it is available and it's really useful. The other ink we have is the Versamark ink, okay? And this is also a non-water based, in fact it's got a glycerin at the base of it, or something similar, a chemical version of glycerin. That allows the ink to stay sticky and wet and tacky, and it almost is like a glue. It feels like a glue. It feels sticky and tacky. And we use that when we want to do anything which involves heat embossing. Now, in the old days, we used to use the pigment inks for heat embossing because they stayed wet for longer, and you still can use pigment inks for heat embossing, but you have to work pretty fast. So Versamark just gives you a longer time. Adding that glycerin keeps it sticky and wet so that you can use heat embossing powders. And again, we will be looking at heat embossing powders in another A to Z. I can't remember which one, to be honest, and I haven't made note of it, so sorry about that. You'll just have to keep an eye open for it. So that hopefully gives you an idea of what the different inks are. And I would say if you are a beginner, then probably you're going to want a Stazon, because you need something that you can use as a background for your, or to just get the picture for you to colour with these items: watercolour pencils, the markers and the dies. And I would suggest you need a Memento, because that provides you with the nicest, smartest, cleanest black lines, and that will give you neat, sharp black lines for your text and anything like that. And then I would suggest that your next idea is to go for a selection of dye colours, and I'll talk about which colours to go for towards the end of the video. So I hope that little chart and my little chat hasn't made it even more confusing, but has helped you just kind of get a handle on what they all are. But it is confusing, and if you need any help, don't forget www.gillyhunt.com. Go find me, go look at my blog, leave me messages, and I'm more than happy to help you. If you're trying to coordinate maybe stamps and inks that you've got in the past from another company with our products, then please ask me what would go with what. So now the next thing is, once you've used your ink, you're going to need to clean things off. And for almost every single, I'm going to bring in 3 items here. I don't know if I've got room. Here we go. For every single item we have a cleaning solution. And I'm going to start off with just 2. Right, we have these wonderful things called chamois. And actually, it comes in a big square, a big rectangle, which is about 4 times, so it's about the equivalent of 4 of these. I cut mine up because I find that a hand-sized piece, which is a quarter of the chamois, is by far easier to manipulate and manage, and I can hold it in my hand and it's not flopping all over the place. And I also run quite a lot of physical classes as well as doing YouTube, so it also means I can make a chamois go to useful for 4 different people. Now I keep mine in a little plastic box, and I just keep a couple ready to use whilst I'm working. Now in between working, I take them out, because if you leave them in damp and sort of drizzly like this, then what happens is over time they will go mouldy. They're perfectly fine. I often leave them for 2-3 days in a row, but every 2 or 3 days I will get them out and I'll dry them out. When you dry them out, listen, they become totally hard and lightweight. They're like those sort of makeup sponges you can use that go totally hard. And all you do is you soak it in a little bowl of water and up it soaks all the water and it becomes this lovely wet damp sponge. Not drippy, it's not dripping, it's once you squeeze it out, it doesn't drip. It does stain, so don't be put off by all these horrible colours and marks. Right, you can even see I had Merry Christmas there on that one. It does stain and it does mark. If you're really fussy, you can bleach them, you can wash them in washing up liquid, all sorts of things to get them cleaner. But it does no harm, and look, I can do this and my hands are still perfectly clean. The ink doesn't come off, it retains the ink inside. Okay, so those are the chamois. I like to have chamois for when I'm out and about or when I'm doing classes, and I also like to have one just ready for the odd little bit when I'm working at home. But better still, from my point of view, I love this, and this is the Stampin' Scrub, which is a slightly scrubby couple of pads. You can hear they've got, I don't know whether I can show you, they've got little hairy, little hairy pieces. It's almost like a little mini brush. Quite soft. You'd think it would be very scrubby. It's quite soft. One side is designed to stay dry and one wet. I don't think it matters which side is which. And then you get stamping mist, which is a little bottle of spray to spray on to the wet side, which gives you a cleaner. Now, I haven't got any bottles because I've just realised when I get my bottles, I straight away decant it into my little tiny spray bottle so that I can use it in my class, and also so I can have it more handily on my desk, and I can have lots of them in different places, one in my bag, one here, one in my craft area, and it's just, I use it that way. So here it is, I've got it in a spray bottle, and you simply spray it on. And I'm just going to really get this stamp good and gooey. So let's give it a bit of colour. Okay, I've really pushed hard. You can even see the impression of where I've pushed hard. So that's got plenty of colour, and I'm actually going to do the really bad thing of rolling it about so that, look, it's all over my flipping block as well. So, oh no, right, oh no, how terrible, how terrible. Right, first of all, that's my stamp, beautifully clean, utterly clean. I would be quite happy to do pale pink with that, and there's my block, perfectly clean. Now it's perfectly dry. Oop. And that too is now perfectly dry, totally clean. Isn't that great? Isn't that instant? Much better than using the classic baby wipes or anything else like that. First of all, it's great for the planet because you can use it time and time again. So baby wipes can go and not fill landfill, but also you don't get fibres. It's designed not to leave fibres. So, and it's also designed to clean in between all the little ridges. So although I love my chamois and I wouldn't be without it, because that also will clean beautifully, and I just simply wipe it over like that. Okay, and again it will clean up the block. The problem with the chamois is it doesn't quite get into the gaps as much as the Stampin' Scrub. So that would be my first buy if I was starting as a beginner, but soon as you can, or the next birthday, ask for one of these as your birthday present. That would be my advice. Those will clean up normal dye inks, your Memento ink, your pigment ink to a certain extent. Your pigment ink you might want to also wash under a tap. Okay, remember you can also wash under a tap if you want. Now the only problem is if we are working with Stazon and the solvent inks, the solvent ink needs a solvent cleaner, and we sell a specialist solvent cleaner, and it comes with like a little top which is almost like a little rollery sponge, and you sponge over. Now here's your warning. The problem with this is it's a very strong solvent, okay, and you'll notice that in here I've also got, in my pack, I've also got a chamois. because when I use this solvent cleaner, I absolutely make sure that when I've finally cleaned it all up, so I've got all the solvent and all the colour off, I then make sure I totally wash all of the residue off with water. So I use my chamois dipped in water to really totally wipe my stamp over. The reason is, if you leave any of the solvent cleaner on your stamps, it will in the long run, it won't straight away, you don't have to panic, but it will start to eat into the fibres of the rubber and into the fibres of the photopolymer. And the photopolymer in particular, you almost shouldn't really use with the Stazon. That's why the rubber stamps are by far superior in some ways. So just be warned. But again, if you're at all concerned about using it or what to do with it, don't forget, get in touch with me. I'm more than happy to help you on an individual basis. Okay, so we've now looked at the cleaners, and the next thing I want to do is to just show you some of the lovely things that you can do using ink. So here's something that I kind of showed you a little bit before, I think, possibly. No, I don't think I have. I might have done in some of my how-to videos. When you get your stamps, certainly when I was starting, I couldn't afford to buy whole huge chunking sets straight away. So you're having to choose maybe only a few stamps. So stamping pads. So once you've got your pad, I just want to show you what you can do to make more colours. So first of all, let's just ink up our, I've got a lovely leaf here. So with this leaf, I can put it down once and stamp, and I'm not pressing hard. I'm just little finger pressure, hardly any pressure at all, but I'm allowing it just to sit so it soaks up some of the ink. And then I'm going to go again without moving, without re-inking, and again, and again, and again. And what I can do is, as you can see here, I can create a whole range of colours just using that one stamped image and that one pat. So watch again. I just go in for a tap, 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 and I'm not pushing hard. I'm not squishing ink out, because if I push hard, what happens is I soak ink into all the gaps. Now we want all the little gaps because that's what creates the image. So it's very gentle tap, 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 tap. You can just hear it touching. That's all it does. Okay, and that has now soaked lots of, and I go into lots of areas. Why? Because sometimes you may get a little patch of your ink that goes dry, or that the pad might get slightly damaged or warped. You might have knocked it or bashed it or pushed too hard in the past. And so by going across in lots of different places and by turning my stamp a little bit backwards and forwards, I'm making sure that the whole of the stamp gets inked. Okay, and there's number one, let it sit, let it soak up. Number two, let it sit and soak up. Number three, let it sit and soak up. Number four, let it sit and soak up. And I might even get a number five out of it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, there you go. And you can now see how wonderful it is to have all those different shades of the same ink. There's the original ink and all the pastel colours in between, going down to a very pale pastel-y orange. And so if you want to use a pastel orange, get yourself a little bit of scrap paper, stamp off a couple of times, and you know you're going to get a really pretty but very faint, dainty little colour. Compare it to the original and you've got quite a different coloured ink. So well worth remembering that by colouring first, second, third, fourth generations, not re-inking, that way you're going to get a whole new extra range of colours that you haven't had before. Okay, so that's one thing to remember. Right, how to use inks. What I'm going to do, or I'm going to try and do, is I'm going to just show you a whole load of techniques, and I'm just going to run across my studio. Hold your horses. I'm coming back. I promise I'm coming back. Can you hear me still? Oh. Whoa. I forgot to get myself a piece of paper. Here we go. Bad planning. Here's a good piece of paper. Nice Wister white. I'm going to start with a piece of Memento inks and a block, okay, and I'm going to go back and find that wherever I put it. Where is it? There it is. I'm going to go back and find my leaf, and I'm going to use my Stampin' scrub to give it a good old pat over. Okay, I'm not rubbing across it because I might do a little bit, but what I need to do is make sure I've gone into all the nooks and crannies, so it's really more of a patting motion that I want to be sure. And you can see, look how much of that orange is coming off. Yeah, so my pad's going really nicely orange. Pop it away. Okay. So the first thing I want you to think about is just plain old simple stamping. And I am going to refer you to S in my A to Z. I know we haven't got there yet. We are coming to S eventually, but S will be for stamping. So I will be showing you lots of stamping techniques. So I'm not going to show you those today, other than just to show you some finished products. But in S for stamping, I'll show you how-tos. So here we go. We can just stamp a simple image. Simple as that. One colour, easy peasy. We could stamp a couple of colours, so just using 2 colours, really simple. I've done a background, I've done wording, and I've done a little heart. Very simple. Or we could get quite carried away and use a multitude of different colours, and we've got some wonderful stamps which can be combined in various degrees to make lovely kind of background patterns, etc. And the only thing you have to remember is that simple tap, tap, tap. So tap, tap, tap. Let's do it on the camera, that would help. So tap, 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 simple stamping. Put it down, hold it down on your page, just give it a very small push, but not a press, because you don't want to splat it all out, because if I had pressed, I would have lost all these lovely dainty details. Okay, so simple stamping is the first thing. Second thing I want to show you is using a dauber. Now what's a dauber, you might ask? Well, it's a little sponge on the end of a little tube, and it's wonderful for picking up ink. You know, you can pick it up off your pad if you want to. I'm sure you will know by now, I like to put my ink onto a acrylic block, and I like to pick it up from there, and I like to do it by going round and round in circles. That way what happens is I thoroughly fill that dauber. Now if I was going round and round like that on top of my ink pad, I might be scuffing up the surface. So by going round and round, I do that, and I keep my daubers all together in a big container, and they're all the different colours from all the different families, so that that's ink that is absorbed in there is never lost. It's always contained within that sponge, so it becomes lovely and rich and full. And these are the effects you can do with the dauber. So look, we can get this lovely faded, beautiful, misty effect in the background. We can get this misty effect in the background. Or we can get quite carried away and we can go for something even more sharp and more graphic. And all I've done is put a couple of pieces of note paper or post-it notes either side to contain it, and I've daubed within that area. And by daubering, all I mean is getting this, and all we're going to do is just circle. Okay, and depending on the pressure I use and how much ink I've got, depends on how that works out. So that's daubering. Now we also can use sponges for similar effects, so I'm going to put these kind of together, because you can use a piece of sponge in almost the same way. We just pick it up off the block, and then we use it in almost the same way, but we get a slightly more scratchy surface depending on the type of sponge. Really good though for doing the edges of things. So if I get a little piece of paper, let me just lean across and get you a little piece. Sponges are really good for just edging something, adding a little bit of ink to the edge. There you go. And that will give you a lovely little edged piece. So sponges and daubers, good for edging, good for special effects. Okay, what else have we got? Well, we've got a blender tool. Now this is a brilliant and very undernoticed and very underused piece of equipment that we have in our catalogue. So again, I'm just going to, just off camera, I'm just going to load a little bit of ink onto the corner of this. And this is our blender tool. It's not one of our blending pens, it's our blender tool, and it's completely white, both ends, and inside is a glycerin type solution. And what happens is you can use it to pick up ink. So I've now got, can you see, I've got the red picked up on the corner tip of the blender tool, and I can now colour almost as if I'm colouring with a pen, and I can pick up lots and go for deep dark colours, or I can fade it out, and if I keep going, what will happen is as I go along, it's, can you see, it's fading to pinker and pinker and pinker and pinker until eventually it almost completely utterly fades to nothing. And when I want to pick up another colour, all I do is I scribble on a little piece of paper or card, and that ink will have gone. Okay, you might still have what looks like a piece of colour on the end, but I promise you there's no colour at all anymore. So I can pick up another colour and start with that. So that's a blender tool, absolutely superb for doing any colouring, and it turns basically all of your ink pads into a set of markers, just straight away, just like that. Okay, so that's a great tool to use. Don't forget other stuff though. I'm going to write other stuff here, and you're going to laugh now because I've got a piece of celery. Right, do you remember at school we used to do potato printing? Well, this is similar. Don't forget that we can pick up our inks, whether we're using it from the pad, and we can do some amazingly wonderful effects using all kinds of other items. How fabulous are these for making colours and prints? So don't forget to get experimental and get silly. Piece of celery for you. What else have we got here? Oh, I've got so many things to show you. I don't know where to go next. Right, here we go. I'm going to just move these out of the way now, because those are just a few ideas of things you can use to spread our inks and use our inks to effect. Here are some more things, but we just need a bit more space for these. Watercolour. We can use our watercolour papers and our specialist papers for some fabulous results. And all I want to say is go to, when I do it, because it's coming soon, go to W in my series from A to Z, and we will be looking at water and watery effects. So you will then be able to look at things using the aqua or water brushes. You'll be able to look at things using our spritzers, and you'll also be able to look at effects that we can use make using our just simple blocks. And I'm just going to give you a little taster. Let's call it a taster. So I'm going to get some blue and some yellow, and all I'm going to do is use the lightest colour first. So I'm going to pop some yellow onto there from my pad, and I'm going to put some blue up at the other end. Okay, so I've just pressed a bit of, always use the darker colour second, because if you happen to get a little bit of the yellow onto your blue, then it's not the end of the world. If you get the dark colour onto the pale pad, it can be a problem. Okay, so here's your little block, and all I've got now is some blue and some yellow on it. And I'm going to give it a little spritz. Oh, shall we try getting it on the actual block? I think I've managed to get it on everything except the actual block. There we go. And all I'm going to do is tip it upside down. Whee! And depending on how much water you've got or how you do it, you will get all kinds of lovely effects. We've got some lovely green patches, so I'm going to just take a simple black image, and because we've used water, okay, so we've used dye inks and water, then don't forget that was a non-smelly thing, so I now need my Smelly Stazon ink. Because then they won't interfere. I could use a dye-based one, but it would interfere. And all I'm going to do is pop him over the top. And I've now got the basis for rather a pretty little seahorse card. Now if I were now to just add some colours, maybe some water pencils, just to bring him out even more, that would make a very pretty little card. Okay, but water, direct to block, spritzed and aqua brushes we're going to cover in the W for water effects. Okay, and let me just put the top back on my Stazon. Remember we said we need to put the cases on, and I've put the cover on first and then the top on, and I like to do that absolutely instantly, because even just leaving it on your desk for 5-10 minutes, it can start to evaporate fairly quickly. Okay, now we can also do, last but not least, some heat embossing. And again, I'm not going to show you this because we are going to look at this, and we're going to look at this under V, which will be V for Versamark, where we're going to look at the Versamark ink and what can be done with the Versamark ink in my A to Z. So wait till V and we'll look at heat embossing. But here's a really lovely card which I just couldn't improve on. This was made for me by my lovely team member Alexi Pritchard, and isn't it beautiful? I really think it's lovely, Lex. And she gave me that as a swap at one of our team events, so thanks very much. I just had to feature it on one of my videos because I love it so much, and I've kept it for quite a long time now, and I shall keep it for even longer. It's very treasured, that. Okay, so heat embossing, look for V under my A to Zs. And before we go, I just want to share two more things. One is another little bit of information, because lots of people ask me, what do you buy first? How do I start as a beginner? What do you suggest I buy, Gilly? So this is what I suggest. I'm sure there are lots of other people who would suggest something else, but this suits me. I think when you're a beginner, the first thing you need is black outlines, because you need to be able to have text that's clear and clean and crisp, so often in black. And also you want to have an edge where you want to maybe do some colouring, because colouring is one of the nicest things to start off doing. So you need either Memento black or Stazon. If you can afford both, have both. Remember back to that beginning picture, and if you can't, then run the tape back to the beginning. It's not tape anymore, is it? How old am I? Run the video back to the beginning and look for either of these in that chart, and you'll find one is an alcohol based and one is a solvent based and one is a dye based, so you can use it with different colouring mediums. Okay, but remember, if you're buying the Stazon, you will also need to buy the stamping cleaner for it. So think about black outlines and buy one or both of those. Then choose an ink family, and I would suggest you choose the Regals or the Brights, because again, remembering back to this moment where we were looking at creating our own almost pastel colours, weren't we, from them? If you start with the subtle selection, although they're beautiful colours, they're all very pale and you can't make them darker. Whereas you can make the dark colours paler by stamping away. So I would suggest that you choose one of the two darker, brighter selections, either the Regals or the Brights. The only problem with the Regals is there's no blue, so you will have to find a blue from somewhere else, and that's a really pain in the neck for me, I'm afraid. I used to always say to people, buy the Regals first, but now they've taken the blue out of the Regals. You can get the dark blue somewhere else from the selections in neutrals or somewhere else, but it does mean if you're buying the whole set, you still don't have that blue to use. So maybe the Bright is the better selection. If you can't buy the whole family, here's my suggestion for what you should buy first within that family. I should look for a blue, a red and a yellow, so that you've got your primary colours covered. Then I would look and check that you've got a green, an orange and a purple. So they'd be my next. So get these 3 and a black and you're away. Get these 6 and a black and you've got much more to play with. Then, if you're buying these all separately anyway, so you're not getting the advantage of buying a whole pack together, then perhaps rather than filling in the colours from the family, I would then go for a neutral and buy either Crumb Cake or one of the greys, and perhaps one of the darker of the 2 greys. But again, it depends on your preference, whether you like very light, delicate cards, excuse me, or not. Then, once you've got those basics, start to fill the colours up, the ones that you like. Why would you want to buy colours that you don't like? So buy nice, pretty colours that you like, that goes with the projects that you're choosing. However, I am going to do a little bit of razzmatazz here and go, if you're a beginner, totally new to stamping, and you want support and help and friendship and being part of a team, you can be part of a team from a distance. It can be done online. It doesn't have to be done face to face. But if you join my team, you will get some big savings, and I mean big, almost halving the cost. Or, let's say, spending the same amount and getting double the quantity. That's an even better idea, isn't it, really? But you need to be able to be buying £99 worth, because that's the starter team cost. But you get more than £99 worth of product in return for your membership. And it's product that you can choose, and it can be whatever you like. So if you're suddenly choosing to stock up on colour and cardstock as a beginner, please consider, if you get to £99 worth in one go, get hold of me, hi@gillyhunt.com. That's hi@gillyhunt.com. And I will more than happily share with you how to become part of the team and make your money go a lot further. Okay, so last but not least, I just want to remind you that the base for all of inks is to create colour. And as soon as you start to do colour with inks, the whole world comes alive. But it also allows you to use your blends, it allows you to use Stampin' markers, and it allows you to use your watercolour pencils. So don't forget, ink is just the start of your adventure. Thanks very much for listening. Bye bye for now.